Was driving home from work last night, actually technically early this morning, in total silence, trying to clear my head and get my thoughts all in order for this video. And I came to the inescapable conclusion that in this particular case regarding Jeffrey Epstein, I am in 100% agreement with the President of the United States. Now, I know that probably comes as a shock to a lot of people, but in this particular instance, the problem that everyone is facing, they can't see because they are proceeding from a false assumption. And that's a form of psychological operations. When you have read into an argument something that is patently unprovable or false, everything else, regardless of how reasonable it seems, is completely fallacious. Now, we're going to get into that in this video. I'm sure a lot of you are like, what are you talking about? This is pretty straightforward, Maki. Why are you defending? You see, when you say defending Mr. Epstein was convicted of solicitation of prostitution. I believe that. I believe he did that. However, everything else that people are conjecturing about, what he may or may not have done, what may or may not be on tapes, who may or may not be on lists, all proceeds from a false assumption. And let's get into that. Donald J. Trump. Quote, what's going on with my boys, and in some case gals? They're all going after Attorney General Pam Bondi, who is doing a fantastic job. We're on one team, MAGA, and I don't like what's happening. We have a perfect administration, the talk of the world, and quote-unquote selfish people are trying to hurt it. All over a guy who never dies. Jeffrey Epstein. For years, it's Epstein over and over again. Why are we giving publicity to files written by Obama, Crooked Hillary, Comey Brennan, and the losers? And he goes on and on. You see, he's exactly right about this. Now, his own base, his own supporters ratioed this particular, I guess what he calls a truth. It's like a tweet, but on his site. Meaning that more people responded to it than liked it. That's what being ratioed means, is when you look down at the statistics of any particular post like this. If you heard the term what got ratioed, that means more people reacted to it in the comments than actually gave it a thumbs up. Meaning it caused a lot of controversy. You see, they know something. They know something, and this is the catch-22 that they are bound in. There's nothing to release, because when you look at the very basic fundamental charge against Mr. Epstein being made in the media and online, it proceeds from a false assumption. Florida Maki, what is that? Well, real quick, we're going to get into more detail these psychological operations over at the Florida Maki Patreon channel. God bless all of you guys for sticking with me. I have been exhausted this last week. Work has been incredibly busy. But we're going to get back to it. We're going to get right to it. Next level up, Need to Know Roundtable. Love to have you over there. 4 levels, 2, 5, 10, and 15. Last couple of videos we did over there, we're at the base level for everybody. Now we're stepping it back up. Because, of course, we talk about things over there where you have to take the gloves off. And you can't censor yourself to talk about it properly. You have to be able to speak the truth, which isn't happening right now on either side of the Epstein argument, because of the false assumption. Anyway, full refund first 90 days. No questions asked. If you'd like to sign up, help support the Bucky, I appreciate it very, very much. We are going to proceed from a correct assumption and go forward. There are no children in this picture. There were no children involved at Epstein Island. A plane can't even land at Epstein Island because there are no runways on Epstein Island. Planes have to go to the island just to the north of it, and then people have to get on boats and or helicopters and then go to Epstein Island. But there were no children. You know, wait a minute, hold on, Florida Maki. There were 15, 16, and 17-year-old children. Really? So you're saying 15, 16, and 17-year-old individuals cannot be held to account or be responsible or have any ability to know the ramifications of their actions? Is anybody getting the picture here? You see, there has to be a certain level of logic in law. Does there not? Am I incorrect in making that assumption? When you say a 15 or 16 or 17-year-old girl cannot consent because she's not, in the eyes of the law, a quote-unquote reasonable person. And I want everybody to stop and either make a mental note of or write that down. Reasonable person. It has to do with implied consent. You see, technically, if you apply the same standard that you would apply to the 15, 16, and 17-year-old girls at Epstein Island, that they did not have the ability to consent, hence making them children, then implied consent cannot be applied to 15, 16, and 17-year-old drivers when it comes to DUI. Because why? Because they can't understand the concept of consent. I'm sure a lot of you who've gotten DUIs out there are now perking your ears up. Oh yeah, that's right. You see, we hand out driver's licenses, and when we give out driver's licenses, there is written into the agreement the idea of implied consent. You see, teen drivers are in a form of a contract with the government, with the state government. No, some people, wait a minute, hold on. A license is not a contract, it's for a privilege. Well, you see, that's where it gets a little bit murky. You see, the idea that, let's say, 17-year-old Joe here decides to go have 6 or 7 beers and then go driving down the road, and then he gets pulled over. Well, you see, he's a minor. He can't understand the ramifications of his actions. Therefore, he can't be held to account. Can he? You see, that's the point. You see, we'll hand licenses to these non-adults with no ability to consent to anything because they have no ability to understand the ramifications of their actions. We'll hand them the keys to a 5,000-6,000 pound missile loaded with explosives, which is what a vehicle is, and put them out on the roadway where every decision they make has a life or death consequence to it. Blow a stop sign, T-bone somebody in a Toyota Tundra, they're probably not going to live. You're blowing around corners at highway speed and you don't see a pedestrian, life and death consequences for individuals, 15, 16, and 17 years old, who cannot be held to account for their actions. Why? Well, because they're children, right? See, therein lies the false presumption. You see, they weren't children. Were they technically under a certain age? Yes. But were they children? No. Because they understood right well the ramifications of their actions. That's why many of those girls ended up settling out of court with Epstein, got huge paydays. Their signatures are all over these agreements. Their signatures are all over depositions they gave to the government about how they went back multiple times, time after time after time. But people want to say, so you're defending somebody who blah, blah, blah kids. No, you're coming from a false assumption. There were no kids involved. There were no kids involved. When you get behind the wheel of a car, you're no longer a kid. Because the government's given you a license, and in that license is something called implied consent. There are no kids in this picture. Pardon me. And she knows this. And he knows this. And Bongino knows this. And Kash Patel knows this. Let me see if I can get to the right. Here we go. Implied consent. Definition and legal meaning. Those of you out there who've either been breathalyzed or been pulled over for DUI, I'm sure you guys already know about this. Implied consent refers to the consent when surrounding circumstances exist which would lead, remember what I said to write down or make a mental note of? Which would lead a reasonable person to believe that this consent had been given. Although no direct, express, or explicit words of agreement had been uttered, the person who gives consent can withdraw the consent at any time and should have the capacity to make valid consent. The actor who gets the consent is bound by the consent and cannot exceed its scope. Now, this is the idea of, quote-unquote, should I do the test? And you can look this stuff up on your own when an officer asks you for a breathalyzer, thinking that you might be over or under the legal limit or whatever. Implied consent says that when you are read that, you are already under arrest at that point. And you're given a choice to refuse or submit to a state-administered test. Now, that's not the roadside breathalyzer. That's the one they give you when they arrest you and take you back to the station. Now, you see, at that point, asking for the implied consent statement would force an officer to arrest you. You see, here's my question. Here's my question. Here's going to be the big one for a lot of people. Why were none of the girls arrested? Why were none of the girls arrested? If Jeffrey Epstein was convicted of solicitation of prostitution, there are two people committing a crime in prostitution, the person offering and the person soliciting. There's never a case where a prostitution bust occurs, unless there's some undercover cop involved, where both the man isn't guilty of something and the woman isn't guilty of something, or whatever two people you want to put into that scenario. When there is prostitution involved, there is money being exchanged for a service illegally. Everybody gets arrested, but not one single girl was ever charged or ever arrested, even when Virginia Jeffrey, right here in the middle, in the pink and purple or whatever, admitted under oath on deposition that she recruited other girls, that she had relations with this blah, 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 and blah, 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 for XXX amount of money. She admitted to it. Why was she never charged? Why was she never arrested? Why weren't any of them? You see, that's the problem, isn't it? That's the problem. An argument, and this is from Sam Harris, can be logically valid, but unsound in that it contains a false premise and therefore leads to a false conclusion. For example, scientists, generally speaking, are smart individuals. Smart meaning they have good test scores, let's just say. Smart people, generally speaking, make fewer mistakes than people who aren't, I guess, characterized as smart. Therefore, scientists do not make mistakes. You see, you cannot assume that just because everything else is a logical conclusion, if there's one piece of information that is incorrect, everything falls apart. This client list everybody wants. Unless you have, first of all, the statute of limitations has run out on all of this, given that it happened 25 years ago. How many of you remember that? That it happened 25 years ago. But let's say this hadn't run out. You would need a client list, and then you would need also videos to marry all this up to, and then proof that those videos hadn't been doctored, hadn't been messed with in any way, chain of custody agreements. And the minute you make any type of an accusation against anybody, you're already in very close to what they call equal protection. Meaning that if there's video of, let's say, a teen girl and some older guy, walking into a room, and then he pulls out $700,000, $800,000, $900,000, hands it to her, and then the video goes on and they do whatever, happy fun time, you got to arrest the girl. If you don't arrest the girl, charge the girl and the guy as well, then you've got a problem. I think one of the reasons, honest to God, that Mr. Epstein is no longer with us is because if and when he got out of prison, he was going to have the grounds for one of the biggest libel, slander, and defamation suits that this world has ever seen against every single major mainstream media operator for characterizing him as a pedophile which is a legal term. Just because a girl is 15, 16, or 17 years old doesn't make her a child. And the legal definition of pedophilia is being attracted to or having attraction towards prepubescent children. And that's actually kind of a weird way of saying it, because prepubescent has baked into it the idea of children. Just because you're underage. And I'm going to ask you this question again. This is why parents lose sleep. Lots and lots of it. Because they know what happens out on the roadways. But we don't have anybody saying, hey, why aren't we yanking the licenses of all of these 15, 16, and 17-year-olds who cannot consent? Why can they not consent? Because if they're children, they aren't a what they call reasonable person. And they can't be held to account for their actions. Why? Because they're children. But they're out there driving around anyway, aren't they? And they can't even be expected to understand the concept of implied consent because of that. You see, this is something that I don't think they even wanted to go into the courts, because they could make this argument. That's why the civil suits were all settled quietly a long time ago. The civil suits that got Epstein's civil suits, we're talking 16, 17, 18 years ago. This was all settled. I mean, seriously, think about this logically for just a minute. I know there's mere women out there that are going to blow up my comment section and call me some kind of a pedophile defender. They're not children. I'm going to say it for 100 times. Capital N, capital O, capital T, children, not children. Every one of these girls, other than maybe one, possibly. And that's, on the edge there. All but maybe one could have easily gotten driver's licenses, need to have insurance, and been given the ability to make life and death decisions with a vehicle every day in the roadways. But you're saying that that's the logical conclusion we should all accept, but we shouldn't accept that they can understand the ramifications of having some happy, fun time roll in the hay with an older guy for money. That's the logic you're expecting everyone in the world to believe. The only thing I disagree with Mr. Trump on this is his characterization here. We're the talk of the world, meaning that people are looking at the American people like we're a bunch of morons, a bunch of hypocritical, self-righteous, nose in the air holy rollers, who in some instances have no problems, like with toddlers and tiaras, or with Blue Ivy, the daughter of Jay-Z and Beyonce, 13 years old. She's out performing on stage. We got little toddlers and tiaras running around, all painted up, dancing around. That's perfectly fine. We got 15, 16, and 17-year-olds blowing down the road in giant vehicles that are, it could easily kill people. But if some 16-year-old girl has a roll in the hay with some 38-year-old man, it is now time to end every discussion of every other thing in the world and demand justice. And demand, who are these men and what did they do, and all this other nonsense. But like I said, to really get into the nuts and bolts of this, we have to go over to Patreon. So I will leave that there. Join us, Patreon channel. Links down in the description to all 4 levels. Love to have you there. Could definitely use the support these days. God bless. Pray for each other. Pray for me, I'll pray for you. Lift each other up. Like, share, subscribe. I'll see you guys next time.